This isn't just a story about a cancelled flight. It's not about an argument over a seat assignment or lost luggage. This is the story of how a single condescending phrase, "wait outside," aimed at the wrong person at the wrong time, became the most expensive 4 words in aviation history. It's about how one woman's voice, a voice a pilot tried to silence, triggered a multi-billion-dollar crisis in a matter of minutes, grounding an entire airline and exposing a terrifying secret hidden at 35,000 feet. Stick around, because the karma that comes back in this story isn't just satisfying, it's catastrophic. The air in JFK's Terminal 4 was thick with the usual cocktail of human emotion, the frantic energy of travelers running late, the quiet despair of a delayed flight, the joyful tears of a reunion. For Dr. Evelyn Reed, it was just another Tuesday. At 28, she had already spent more time in airport terminals than most people do in a lifetime. As one of the country's leading cybersecurity experts, specializing in avionics, the complex electronic systems that fly modern aircraft, her job was to be the ghost in the machine, the digital guardian angel for airlines that didn't even know they needed one. She was flying Aura Wing Airlines Flight 815 to San Francisco. It was a routine trip to speak at a tech conference, but Evelyn's mind was never truly off the clock. Dressed in comfortable but professional travel attire, dark jeans, a blazer, and practical flats, she looked more like a graduate student than a woman who held the digital keys to entire fleets. This anonymity was usually a benefit. Today, it would be a curse. While waiting to board, she had her laptop open, idly monitoring the public network traffic of the airport's systems. It was a habit, like a chef, tasting the salt levels in the air. Most of it was noise, people streaming movies, posting to social media. But then something caught her eye. A tiny, anomalous data packet, pinging from the Aura Wing Gate's internal network. It was misshapen, a digital limp. It was trying to talk to the plane at the gate, an Airbus A320neo, but its request was being intermittently rejected. Curiosity piqued, she dug deeper. Using a secured, encrypted connection, she cross-referenced the packet's signature against a library of known threats she maintained for her work with the FAA and NTSB. There was no match. This wasn't a known virus. It was something else. Something quiet and subtle. Her brow furrowed. It looked like a flawed authentication handshake from a recent ground crew software update she had peripherally heard about. Most systems would simply ignore it, but the intermittent nature of the rejection suggested a deeper conflict within the aircraft's own operating system. It was a tiny crack in a very large dam. When her boarding group was called, she packed her laptop, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. As she handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, a stern-faced woman named Brenda Evelyn made a decision. "Excuse me," she said politely. "I need to have a quick word with the flight crew, if possible. Just a technical query." Brenda looked her up and down, her eyes lingering for a fraction of a second too long. It was a look Evelyn knew well, the silent, dismissive appraisal that questioned her presence, her purpose. "The crew is busy with pre-flight checks, ma'am," Brenda said, her voice dripping with practiced condescension. "You can take your seat." "I understand they're busy, but this is a matter of operational security," Evelyn insisted, keeping her voice calm and even. "I'm a certified avionics security specialist. I noticed a network anomaly that I believe pertains to this specific aircraft." Brenda's expression hardened. "A specialist? Honey, if there's a problem, our people will find it. Now please, you're holding up the line." The knot in Evelyn's stomach tightened into a cold stone. This was the first wall. She took a deep breath. "With all due respect, I have credentials. I consult for the FAA. I'm asking you to please just pass a message to the captain. It will take 30 seconds. With an exaggerated sigh, Brenda picked up the intercom. "Captain Jensen, you have a passenger at the gate, a specialist, who insists on speaking with you." She said the word specialist as if it were a joke. A few moments later, the captain emerged from the jet bridge. Captain Mark Jensen was the picture of a pilot from a 1960s advertisement, tall, square-jawed, with silvering temples and an air of unshakable authority. He strode to the desk, his eyes immediately dismissing Evelyn and focusing on Brenda. "What's the problem here, Brenda?" he asked, his voice a low baritone used to commanding attention. "This young lady claims she found a network anomaly," Brenda reported, barely looking at Evelyn. Captain Jensen finally turned his gaze on Evelyn. It was not a look of curiosity, but of irritation. He saw a young black woman, and his mind hardened by decades of unchallenged authority and ingrained bias filled in the blanks. She was an overeager tech kid, a know-it-all trying to show off. "Listen, sweetheart." He started the word sweetheart, a deliberate and demeaning pat on the head. "I've been flying these birds for 30 years. My instruments tell me this plane is perfect. Whatever you think you saw on your little computer is probably just the airport's Wi-Fi acting up." Evelyn's calm began to fray. "Captain, this isn't about the Wi-Fi. This is about the integrity of the aircraft's ground communication link. It's showing signs of a potential handshake protocol failure. It could be nothing, but it could also be a symptom of a critical software conflict that could affect flight control communications during ascent." She spoke his language. She used the right terms. It should have been enough to earn a moment of consideration. Instead, Captain Jensen chuckled. It was a short, sharp, ugly sound. "A handshake protocol failure. Did you learn that on YouTube? Look, I have 187 souls to get to San Francisco, and I'm not going to delay my takeoff because someone with a laptop has a theory." He turned his back on her, a gesture of finality. "Brenda, finish up the boarding." "Captain, wait," Evelyn said, her voice rising slightly, a desperate edge creeping in. "I am begging you, just let your ground maintenance run a diagnostic. Level 3. It will take 10 minutes. If I'm wrong, I will personally apologize to every passenger for the delay." He stopped and turned back slowly, his face a mask of cold fury. The folksy pilot was gone, replaced by an autocrat whose kingdom had been questioned. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "I don't know who you think you are," he seethed, his voice low and menacing. "But you are not telling me how to fly my plane. You are a passenger, nothing more. Now you have 2 choices. Get on the plane and be quiet, or stay here. But you are done talking to me." He started to walk away again. Evelyn, desperate, made one last plea. "My name is Dr. Evelyn Reed. My FAA consultant number is 714 Alpha Delta." He cut her off, waving a dismissive hand, without even looking back. He spoke to Brenda, but his words were meant for Evelyn, loud enough for the entire gate area to hear. "Brenda, this woman is being disruptive. She can wait outside the boarding area until I've closed the door. If she makes another sound, call security." And with that, he was gone, disappearing down the jet bridge. The humiliation was a physical blow. "Wait outside." It wasn't just a command. It was an erasure. He had dismissed her, her expertise, her warning, her very identity, and banished her like a child. The other passengers stared, some with pity, some with annoyance. Brenda smirked, a small, triumphant curl of her lip. "You heard the captain," she said sweetly. "Please step away from the gate." Evelyn Reed stood frozen for a moment, the world narrowing to the smug look on Brenda's face and the retreating back of Captain Jensen. The cold stone in her stomach now felt like a block of ice. They thought they had won. They thought they had silenced her. She backed away from the gate, her face an unreadable mask. She walked over to a deserted seating area, took out her phone and sat down. Her hands were perfectly steady. The anger was still there, a white-hot coal, but it was now being forged into something else. Something cold, precise, and utterly unstoppable. They had told her to wait outside. Fine. She would wait, and in the next 5 minutes, she was going to shut the entire airline down. The ambient noise of the terminal faded into a dull roar. Evelyn's world had shrunk to the glowing screen of her phone. Her fingers, which had been trembling with a mixture of adrenaline and fury, were now moving with practiced, deliberate speed. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She wasn't a disruptive woman. She was Dr. Evelyn Reed, and Captain Mark Jensen had just made the biggest mistake of his career. He hadn't just insulted a passenger, he had ignored a Category 1 threat assessment from a federally credentialed expert. She bypassed the airline's customer service line. She bypassed their corporate headquarters. Calling them would be like reporting a fire to the arsonist. They had already shown their hand. Their culture was one of arrogance and dismissal. She needed to go over their heads. She needed to go nuclear. Her thumb scrolled through a highly encrypted contact list until it landed on a name, David Chen, FAA. David was the Deputy Director of the Aviation Cybersecurity Command, ACC, a branch of the FAA so specialized that most pilots didn't even know it existed. He was Evelyn's former mentor, and one of the few people on the planet who truly understood the fragility of the digital systems that kept tens of thousands of planes safely in the air. To David, Evelyn wasn't just a consultant. She was his sharpest asset, a prodigy with an almost supernatural talent for seeing the ghosts in the code. She pressed the call button. It rang once. "Reed." A calm, professional voice answered. "No hello. David didn't do pleasantries on this line." "David, it's Evelyn. I'm at JFK Terminal 4, Gate B23. She spoke quickly, her voice low and devoid of emotion. "I am invoking Protocol 7. There was a moment of absolute silence on the other end of the line. Protocol 7, the unspoken option. It was the digital equivalent of pulling the big red lever that shuts down the power grid. It was reserved for an active, verified imminent threat to air safety, a threat so severe that it bypassed all normal chains of command. To invoke it was to stake your entire career, your reputation, and your freedom on the certainty that you were right. A false alarm meant at best professional ruin and at worst federal charges. "Evelyn, confirm," David said, his voice now laced with a sudden sharp tension. He knew she would never make this call lightly. "Confirmed, David. Protocol 7. I have a Class 3 vulnerability, manifesting on an Aura Wing A320neo tail, number N942AW, flight 815 to SFO. Ground crew software update from 3 days ago. Patch AW77B. It's creating a recursive authentication error in the aircraft's primary bus controller. I'm seeing ghost pings. It's subtle, but it's there. My assessment is that under the stress of ascent and system handover, from ground to air networks, there is a non-trivial probability. I'm estimating 15 to 20% of a full avionics suite crash. Flight control, navigation, everything." She heard the frantic clacking of a keyboard on David's end. He was already pulling up the data. 15 to 20%, he breathed. In the world of aviation, anything over 0.01% was considered a catastrophe. 15% was an apocalypse. "How did you observe this, Evelyn?" "From the terminal's public network. I wasn't even trying, David. The signal is bleeding. That's how unstable it is. The plane is actively rejecting corrupted data packets from its own airline's ground server." "Did you notify the flight crew?" he asked, his voice tight. This was a critical part of the protocol. A single bitter laugh escaped Evelyn's lips. I tried. Gate agent and captain both dismissed me. Captain's name is Mark Jensen. He called me sweetheart and told me to wait outside for being disruptive. She heard David swear under his breath, a sharp, angry sound. He wasn't just her boss, he was her advocate. The casual, baked-in prejudice of the old guard was a problem he fought against daily. Okay, Evelyn, I have everything I need. Your observation is logged. Your credentials are my authority. Stay where you are, and Evelyn, yes, you did the right thing. The line went dead. Evelyn lowered her phone. It had been 4 minutes and 37 seconds since Captain Jensen had disappeared down the jet bridge. She looked over at Gate B23. The last of the passengers were shuffling on board. The jet bridge was still connected, but the main door to the terminal had been closed. Brenda, the gate agent, was tidying up her desk, a smug look of satisfaction on her face. She probably thought Evelyn had given up and left. Through the massive terminal window, Evelyn could see the plane, N942AW. The ground crew was pulling away the chocks. The luggage compartment was sealed. The navigation lights blinked rhythmically. It was a picture of normalcy, a massive, powerful machine ready to slip the bonds of Earth. But Evelyn knew better. She saw the sickness she had diagnosed. It was like watching a perfectly healthy-looking person walk towards a cliff, unaware that they had a fatal aneurysm about to burst in their brain. A profound sense of calm washed over her. She had done her part. The ball was no longer in her court. She had lit the fuse, and the charge was now rocketing its way through the highest levels of the Federal Aviation Administration. Captain Jensen, sitting in his cockpit, running through his final pre-flight checklist, believed he was in complete control. He believed he was the master of his domain, the king of his metal tube. He had no idea that thousands of miles away, in a secure bunker in Washington, D.C., a man named David Chen had just slammed a phone down, turned to his team and uttered 2 words that would bring Aura Airlines to its knees. Ground them all, in the windowless, climate-controlled heart of the FAA's Aviation Cybersecurity Command. David Chen's order landed with the force of a physical blow. The dozen or so analysts in the room, accustomed to dealing with theoretical threats and running simulations, froze. Ground them all wasn't a suggestion. It was an executive order with the full weight of federal law behind it. "Sir, a junior analyst." A young man named Ben stammered. "You mean all of them?" "You heard me." David snapped his eyes, scanning 3 different monitors at once. He was pulling up Aura Wing's fleet data, the specifics of the A321 Neo, and Evelyn's preliminary threat report. Every Aura Wing A321 Neo and A320 Neo, running the AW77B software patch, effective immediately. This is an emergency airworthiness directive. No takeoffs. Any aircraft currently in the air on a flight under 2 hours must be diverted. All others are to be flagged for priority landing and immediate systems quarantine. Get me the CIO of Aura Wing on a secure line. Now. The room exploded into a symphony of controlled chaos. Phones were dialed. Red flags appeared on digital maps of the United States airspace. Encrypted messages shot across the country to air traffic control centers in New York, Chicago, Atlanta, and Los Angeles. The first official call went from the ACC to the National Air Traffic Control System Command Center in Warrenton, Virginia. The supervisor there, a veteran named Maria Flores, took the call. When she heard the authority code and the nature of the directive, the blood drained from her face. "You're grounding the entire Aura Wing Neo fleet. That's over 100 aircraft," she said, her mind already calculating the logistical nightmare. "The directive is from the ACC. The analyst on the other end stated flatly. It is not a request." Maria didn't hesitate. She hit the button on her console that broadcast an all-hands alert. "Listen up," she yelled across the control floor. "We have an immediate FAA EAD. All Aura Wing Airbuses models A320neo and A321neo are now under a national ground stop. I repeat, all Aura Wing Neo aircraft are grounded, no exceptions." The ripple effect was instantaneous and brutal. In the Aura Wing corporate headquarters in Dallas, Texas, CEO Richard Sterling was in a quarterly budget meeting, droning on about profit margins and passenger satisfaction scores. Sterling was a man who lived and breathed spreadsheets. He saw flying not as a miracle of engineering, but as a series of numbers to be optimized. His phone, which was supposed to be on silent, buzzed violently on the polished mahogany table. He glanced at it, irritated. The caller ID read, FAA Enforcement. He excused himself, stepping into his glass-walled office that overlooked the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. "This is Sterling." "Mr. Sterling, this is David Chen, Deputy Director of the FAA's Cybersecurity Command." David's voice was like ice. "As of 09:42 Eastern Time, we have issued an emergency airworthiness directive grounding your entire fleet of Airbus A320 and A321neo aircraft. You are legally required to comply immediately." Sterling felt a wave of dizziness. "Ground them on what authority? What is this about? Some kind of mistake?" "It's not a mistake," David said. "We have a credible verified threat of a catastrophic avionics failure linked to your recent AW77B software update. This is a matter of national security and public safety. You will comply, or I will get a federal injunction and have U.S. Marshals on your runways." Sterling's corporate bluster evaporated. He saw his airline stock price plummeting. He saw the news headlines. He saw his multi-million-dollar bonus turning to ash. We will comply," he stammered. "What's the nature of the threat?" "You'll receive the full directive in your inbox in 5 minutes. My advice to you, Mr. Sterling, is to get your head of operations on the line and start rerouting your passengers because your airline, for all intents and purposes, just shut down." David hung up. Back at JFK in the cockpit of Aura Wing Flight 815, Captain Mark Jensen was smiling. He'd just received clearance from the tower. "Aura Wing 815, you are cleared for pushback and taxi to runway 31L. "Cleared for pushback. Aura Wing 815. His first officer, a young, competent pilot named Mike, responded. Jensen keyed the intercom to the cabin. "Well, folks, flight attendants, please prepare for departure. For those of you on the right side of the aircraft, you'll get a nice view of the city as we climb out. Flight time to San Francisco is looking to be a smooth 5 hours and 20 minutes. He was feeling smug. He had handled that disruptive woman perfectly, put her in her place, kept his flight on schedule. He was the captain, the man in charge. His world was orderly, and he was its master. As the tug began to push the massive plane back from the gate, the radio crackled to life, but with a different, more urgent voice. It wasn't the usual ground controller. It was the tower supervisor. "All aircraft stand by. Aura Wing 815, hold your position. I repeat, Aura Wing 815, stop pushback. Hold your position." Jensen and his first officer exchanged a confused glance. "Tower Aura Wing 815, confirm hold position." Jensen asked, a hint of annoyance in his voice. "Aura Wing 815, that is affirmative." The voice from the tower was strained, tense. "There is a national ground stop in effect for your aircraft type. By order of the FAA, you are not cleared for taxi. You are not cleared for flight. Return to the gate immediately." The words didn't compute. A national ground stop for his plane. It was impossible. It had to be a mistake. "Tower, say again," Jensen demanded. "On what grounds?" "Sir, I don't have the details. The order just came down. It's the entire fleet. All of you. Return to the gate." First Officer Mike looked at Jensen, his eyes wide. "The whole fleet, Mark, what the hell is going on?" But Mark Jensen wasn't looking at Mike. He was staring out the cockpit window back towards the terminal. His eyes scanned the windows, the waiting areas. And then he saw her, Dr. Evelyn Reed. She was standing by the window now, her phone to her ear, looking directly at his plane. Her expression was not one of anger or triumph. It was one of cold, sober finality. It was the look of a doctor who had just pronounced a time of death. In that single chilling moment, Captain Mark Jensen understood. That woman, that sweetheart, with her little computer and her YouTube theories, had done this. The thought was so preposterous, so outside the realm of his ordered world, that he almost laughed. But he couldn't, because the plane was now being slowly, humiliatingly towed back to the gate it had just left. The passengers in the cabin began to murmur, confused. The flight attendants had no answers, and in the cockpit the master of the skies felt a cold dread creep up his spine. He had told a black girl to wait outside, and she had just shut his entire world down. 24 hours later, the 50th floor boardroom of Aura Wing's Dallas headquarters felt like a tomb. The panoramic view of the Texas sky was obscured by drawn blinds, as if the company itself were in mourning. The air was thick with the stench of fear and expensive coffee. At the head of the colossal marble table sat CEO Richard Sterling, his face pale and haggard. Flanking him were his legal team, the head of operations, and the chief of public relations, whose phone was vibrating itself into a molten puddle. The news was a firestorm. Aura Wing grounds entire fleet amidst FAA safety crisis. Stock plummets 40% on mysterious technical fault. Thousands stranded as airline cancels hundreds of flights. The story was everywhere, and Aura Wing had no answers. They were bleeding money at a rate of millions of dollars per hour. Across the table from them sat 3 people who held the company's fate in their hands. David Chen from the FAA, looking severe and uncompromising in a dark suit. Next to him, a senior NTSB investigator. And between them, the architect of this crisis, Dr. Evelyn Reed. She was no longer the anonymous traveler from JFK. She was dressed in a sharp, professional pantsuit, her hair pulled back, her demeanor radiating a calm, unassailable competence that made the high-powered executives across from her squirm. She was not here as a victim or a passenger. She was here as the FAA's lead technical consultant on the vulnerability she had discovered. She was in charge. Let's be clear about why we're here. David Chen began, his voice cutting through the tension. Dr. Reed, an accredited FAA consultant, identified a critical, zero-day vulnerability in your avionics software. She attempted to warn your crew following established protocols for on-site threat reporting. She was ignored, belittled, and dismissed by your staff in a manner that was not only unprofessional, but grossly negligent. Sterling cleared his throat, trying to regain some semblance of control. Mr. Chen, we are deeply grateful to Dr. Reed for bringing this to our attention. We have launched a full internal investigation into the conduct of the employees involved. Evelyn held up a hand, a simple gesture that silenced the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice steady and clear. Let's not waste time on platitudes. Your internal investigation is irrelevant to me. My concern is the flaw in your system, a flaw that your team should have caught. Your AW77B patch contained a corrupted line of code that under specific circumstances creates a feedback loop in the bus controller, leading to what we call ghost commands. Essentially, the plane starts giving itself phantom instructions. Our simulations run overnight show that Dr. Reed's initial 15–20% failure estimate was conservative. The actual probability of catastrophic avionics failure during the climb-out phase was closer to 35%. A collective gasp went around the table. 35%. 1 in 3 flights was a potential death trap. They hadn't just dodged a bullet. They had been standing in the middle of a firing squad, and the guns had jammed at the last second. Sterling's lawyer leaned in and whispered something to him. Sterling nodded. "Dr. Reed, we cannot thank you enough. Your diligence has averted a tragedy. We are prepared to offer you a significant consulting fee for your discovery, and of course, a lifetime of first-class travel on Aura-wing Airlines once we are flying again." It was a clumsy, insulting attempt at a bribe, a way to turn this into a transaction to make her go away quietly. Evelyn stared at him, her expression unblinking. A lifetime supply of flights on an airline. I wouldn't trust to fly a kite in a park. "No thank you, Mr. Sterling. You don't seem to understand the gravity of your situation. This isn't about a bug. This is about your culture." She slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a file. The flaw originated from a third-party developer in a country with notoriously lax security standards. You used them because they were 40% cheaper than your usual contractor. Your internal quality assurance team flagged the update for a full manual review. That review was scheduled for 2 weeks. According to this internal email, she tapped the screen. "You, Mr." Sterling personally ordered the update to be pushed through ahead of schedule to save on projected fuel costs promised by the new software, overriding your own safety engineers. Richard Sterling's face went from pale to ghostly white. He looked at the email on the screen. His email, his words, his signature. He was caught. "That's taken out of context," he stammered. "Is it?" David Chen interjected his voice like granite. "Because it looks a lot like you knowingly compromised the safety of your entire fleet to improve your quarterly earnings report." The door to the boardroom opened. A nervous assistant beckoned to one of the lawyers. After a hushed, frantic conversation, the lawyer came back to the table, his face grim. "Mr. Sterling," he whispered, "they're here." "Who's here?" Sterling snapped. "The employees from the JFK incident, Captain Jensen and the gate agent Brenda Last. We flew them in for the internal investigation." David Chen leaned forward. "Good. Send them in. I want to hear their version of events." A few moments later, Captain Mark Jensen and Brenda Last walked into the boardroom. They were a stark contrast to the corporate executives. Jensen was still in his pilot's uniform, trying to project an aura of command, but the stress and confusion were evident in the tightness around his eyes. Brenda looked terrified, clutching her purse like a life raft. Their eyes scanned the room and then settled on Evelyn. Jensen's jaw tightened. Brenda looked as if she'd seen a ghost. They had been told they were here for a routine internal review. They had no idea they were walking into their own trial with the judge, jury, and executioner already seated. "Captain Jensen," David Chen said, his voice deceptively calm, "please walk us through your interaction with Dr. Reed at gate B23 yesterday morning." Jensen straightened his tie, falling back on a lifetime of ingrained authority. "Yes, sir. We were in the final stages of boarding. This young woman," he gestured towards Evelyn without making eye contact, "became agitated and disruptive. She was making baseless claims about a technical problem with the aircraft. For the safety and comfort of the other passengers, and to maintain our on-time departure, I instructed my gate agent to ask her to step aside." "Baseless claims," Evelyn repeated quietly, the single question hanging in the air like a guillotine. "She was talking about computer nonsense, things that didn't show up on any of my instruments. My instruments are what matter." Jensen insisted, his voice gaining a self-righteous edge. They were all green. The plane was perfectly safe. Perfectly safe, David Chen repeated, letting the words sink in. Captain, the computer nonsense she was talking about was a flaw that our top engineers now refer to as the single most terrifying piece of malicious code we have ever seen in a commercial avionics system. The reason your instruments were green is that the flaw was designed to tell them they were green right up until the moment it sent your plane into an uncontrollable dive. The color drained from Jensen's face. He looked at his first officer, who wasn't in the room, then at the executives, and finally reluctantly at Evelyn. He saw no agitated woman. He saw the expert he had dismissed. "And your term for Dr. Reed?" David continued, his eyes like daggers. "Wasn't it sweetheart?" Jensen flinched as if struck. I may have been familiar. It was a stressful situation. "And your final instruction to her?" David pressed on, relentless. "What was that?" Jensen remained silent, his jaw clenched. "He told her to wait outside," Brenda piped up, trying to defend her captain. "She was holding up the flight, making a scene. Evelyn asked, her voice dangerously soft as she turned her attention to the gate agent. "Brenda, did I raise my voice? Did I threaten anyone? Or did I repeatedly and calmly state my credentials and ask to speak to the maintenance crew?" Brenda opened her mouth, then closed it. The memory stripped of her own prejudice and annoyance was clear. Evelyn had been perfectly calm, frighteningly calm. David Chen stood up, placing his hands on the table. "This meeting is over. Mr. Sterling, you and your board have much to discuss. I suggest you start with the terms of your resignation. The FAA will be taking over the investigation from here. Aura Wing Airlines is grounded until we have personally certified every single one of your aircraft. That could be weeks. It could be months. Frankly, I hope you never fly again." He then turned his gaze to the two employees standing in the middle of the room. "Captain Jensen, Brenda last. You will surrender your airport credentials to my assistant on your way out. The FAA is opening a formal inquiry into your conduct. You will be hearing from us." He looked at Evelyn. "Dr. Reed, we're done here." Evelyn stood up and walked towards the door, not even giving the ruined careers and the shattered company a second glance. As she passed Mark Jensen, he finally looked her directly in the eye. He saw no triumph, no "I told you so." He only saw a profound, devastating competence. He had built his entire world on a foundation of authority seniority and the casual assumption of his own superiority. In 5 minutes, she had demolished it. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had committed an act of professional suicide, and he had almost taken 187 innocent souls with him. The weight of that realization crushed him right there in the silent, tomb-like boardroom. In the days that followed, Aura Wing Airlines ceased to be a functioning company and became a case study in corporate implosion. The FAA investigation, led by David Chen, with Evelyn as his lead technical advisor, was not a gentle inquiry. It was an autopsy conducted with ruthless precision. They didn't just look at the code, they dissected the culture that had allowed it to fester. The investigators descended upon Aura Wing's Dallas headquarters like a conquering army. They seized servers, copied hard drives, and began a marathon of interviews with everyone from the software engineers to the baggage handlers. What they found was a rotten core beneath a glossy corporate veneer. A history of cutting corners, of prioritizing schedules over safety checks, of managers pressuring engineers to sign off on updates they weren't comfortable with. Richard Sterling's email was just the tip of a very large, very dangerous iceberg. The focus of one part of the investigation, however, was intensely personal. It centered on the actions of Captain Mark Jensen and gate agent Brenda Last. The NTSB, which handles accident and incident investigations, wanted to understand the human factors. Why was a credible warning from a credentialed expert not just ignored, but treated with such open hostility? They started with the cockpit voice recorder from Flight 815. The device had been running during the entire incident at the gate. The audio was crystal clear. Evelyn from a distance. A matter of operational security. I'm a certified avionics security specialist. Brenda on intercom. Captain Jensen, you have a passenger at the gate, a specialist. The sneer was audible even through the tinny speaker. Jensen to Brenda. What's the problem here, Brenda? Jensen to Evelyn. Listen, sweetheart, whatever you think you saw on your little computer. The investigators in the listening room winced. The condescension was palpable. They listened to Evelyn's calm, technical explanation and Jensen's increasingly arrogant dismissals. They heard his final damning command. Wait outside. But the most revealing part came after Jensen returned to the cockpit. First Officer Mike. What was that all about? Jensen. Just some kid. Probably a first-time flyer who watched a documentary on plane crashes, and now she thinks she's an expert. Wanted to tell me how to do my job. Mike. She sounded like she knew the terminology. Jensen. They all do. They learn a few buzzwords and think they're smarter than a man with 15,000 flight hours. You just got to shut that down fast. You show them who's in charge. That's how you maintain control. The transcript was a smoking gun. It wasn't just a misjudgment, it was a deliberate philosophy of dismissing outside input based on prejudice. Jensen didn't evaluate her warning. He evaluated her a young black woman and decided she was not credible. His 15,000 hours of experience had become a shield of arrogance, blinding him completely. Next, they interviewed Brenda last. She sat in a sterile grey room opposite two stern-faced FAA investigators. She tried to stick to her story. She was causing a scene. Brenda insisted, wringing her hands. The other passengers were getting upset. I was just trying to do my job and get the flight out on time. The lead investigator, a woman named Sarah Evans, slid a stack of papers across the table. They were written statements from other passengers who had been at gate B-23. Ms. Last, we've interviewed a dozen other passengers, Sarah said calmly. Not a single one described Dr. Reed as causing a scene. In fact, most of them used words like calm, professional, and polite. Several, however, described your tone as rude and dismissive. One witness even quoted you calling Dr. Reed honey under your breath. Brenda's composure crumbled. The lies were being peeled away, layer by layer. Captain Jensen, he told me to handle it. She stammered, tears welling in her eyes. I was just following orders. Were you following orders when you used a mocking tone on the intercom? Sarah pressed. Was it an order to look Dr. Reed up and down with contempt before she even spoke a word? Or was it that you Captain Jensen made an assumption about her the moment you saw her? Brenda had no answer. Her career, built on a foundation of minor authority and rigid rule-following, was dissolving in front of her. She wasn't just an accessory. She was an active participant, an enabler of the arrogance that nearly led to disaster. The investigation into Mark Jensen was even more damning. The FAA has a system for anonymous complaints from crew members called the Aviation Safety Action Program, ASAP. As soon as news of the Aura Wing grounding broke and whispers of the JFK incident began to circulate, the floodgates opened. Co-pilots, flight attendants, and even ground crew who had flown with Jensen for years began filing reports. A pattern emerged. Jensen was known as Captain America behind his back, not for his heroism, but for his square-jawed, my way or the highway attitude. The reports detailed a history of him dismissing the concerns of female flight attendants, berating junior co-pilots for questioning his decisions, and refusing to listen to maintenance crews who flagged minor issues. He was a pilot from a bygone era, a man who believed the captain was infallible a god in the cockpit. He had never caused an accident before, because he was a technically skilled pilot. But his ego was a ticking time bomb, and Evelyn Reed had just happened to be there when it finally went off. The most damning piece of evidence came from a senior flight attendant who had flown with Jensen for a decade. Her report read, "Captain Jensen often joked that the most dangerous things on a plane were a fire in the cargo hold and a woman with an opinion in the cabin." He said it so often, it became his catchphrase. When presented with this mountain of evidence, the voice recordings, the passenger statements, the crew complaints, Mark Jensen's defense collapsed. His bluster and arrogance gave way to a dawning, horrifying understanding of his own culpability. He wasn't the hero of the story. He was the villain. His lie, his carefully constructed image of the infallible commander, was utterly and completely unraveled. The FAA hearing for Captain Mark Jensen was not held in a grand courtroom. It was in a nondescript federal building in Washington, D.C., in a room that felt more like a parole board hearing than a trial. There was no jury, only a 3-person panel of senior FAA administrators, 2 veteran pilots, and an aviation lawyer. David Chen was present as a witness. Evelyn Reed was not. She had submitted her testimony in writing and had no desire to witness the final act of a tragedy Jensen had written for himself. Mark Jensen sat at a simple wooden table, his expensive pilot's uniform replaced by an ill-fitting suit. He looked 10 years older. The swagger was gone, replaced by the stooped shoulders of a defeated man. His lawyer sat beside him, shuffling papers that both of them knew were useless. The panel chair, a stoic man named Frank Miller, began the proceedings. "Captain Jensen, we are here today to review the events of August 2025 and determine your fitness to hold an airline transport pilot license. We have reviewed the evidence, including the CVR transcript NTSB findings, and dozens of witness and character statements. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Jensen's lawyer stood up. "Mr. Chairman, Captain Jensen has an exemplary 30-year record with over 15,000 hours of flight time without a single major incident. This event, while regrettable, was a lapse in judgment under the pressure of an on-time departure." Miller cut him off with a raised hand. "Counselor, we are well aware of his flight hours. They are, in fact, part of the problem. An experienced pilot should know better. I want to hear from Captain Jensen himself." Mark Jensen slowly rose to his feet. He looked at the faces of the panel men who were his peers, who understood the world he came from. He had planned to apologize, to show remorse, to beg for a suspension instead of a revocation. But looking at their stony faces, he knew it was pointless. They weren't just judging his actions on that one day. They were judging the entire mindset that led to them. "Sirs," he began, his voice raspy, "I made a mistake. I misjudged the situation. I was arrogant. I see that now. I let my pride get in the way of my duty. I had a credible warning and I ignored it. There is no excuse for that. I endangered my passengers, my crew, everyone." He finally said the words, the admission that had been stuck in his throat for weeks. It was a complete confession. He hoped it might earn him a shred of mercy. Frank Miller leaned forward, his expression unchanging. "Captain, it was more than a mistake. It was a failure of the most fundamental duty of a pilot to listen. You didn't just ignore a warning. You demonstrated a pattern of behavior, a prejudice that is incompatible with the responsibilities of command. You did not see an expert with a concern. You saw a woman you felt you needed to put in her place. What if Dr. Reed had been a man? an older white man in a pilot's uniform, would you have called him sweetheart and told him to wait outside? Jensen had no answer. The silence in the room was his condemnation. The pilot's chair is not a throne, Captain. Miller continued, his voice low and severe. It is a seat of profound responsibility. That responsibility requires humility. It requires the understanding that you are not the smartest person in the room, and that a good idea or a critical warning can come from anywhere: the first officer, a flight attendant, the ground crew, or even, as in this case, a passenger. You failed that test, and in doing so, you have proven that you cannot be trusted with the lives of the public. The verdict was a formality. Effective immediately, the Federal Aviation Administration permanently revokes the airline transport pilot license of Mark T. Jensen. You will not command a commercial aircraft in United States airspace again. The gavel didn't fall. There was no dramatic sound, just the quiet, devastating finality of the words. Jensen collapsed back into his chair, a hollowed-out shell of the man he once was. 30 years of identity, of pride of being the captain, erased in a single sentence. His career was over. The karma for the other players was just as swift and decisive. Brenda Last was fired from Aura Wing Airlines. The FAA flagged her record, ensuring she would never work in a sensitive airport security or operational role again. She ended up taking a job at a retail store in the airport mall, forced to watch the planes she used to board take off without her. Richard Sterling, the CEO, was forced to resign in disgrace by the Aura Wing board. He left with a drastically reduced severance package and became a pariah in the corporate world. Worse, the Department of Justice opened a criminal investigation into his deliberate overriding of safety protocols, and he was soon facing federal charges. Aura Wing Airlines itself was crippled. After a 3-month grounding, massive fines from the FAA, and a complete multi-billion-dollar overhaul of their software and safety procedures, they were allowed to fly again. But the public's trust was shattered. Their stock was worthless. Within a year, the once proud airline was bought out for pennies on the dollar by a larger competitor, its name and logo erased from the skies forever. The consequences were absolute. The arrogance, the prejudice, the corporate greed, all of it had been judged, and the sentence was corporate death. 6 months later, Dr. Evelyn Reed stood at a podium in front of the largest assembly of aviation executives and engineers in the world. The setting was the annual Global Air Safety Symposium in Washington, D.C. She wasn't there as a consultant or a guest. She was the keynote speaker. The story of Aura Wing Flight 815 had become a legend in the industry, a terrifying cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and flight simulators. Evelyn Reed was no longer an anonymous ghost in the machine. She was a hero. She had been on the cover of magazines hailed by Congress and was now the most sought-after cybersecurity expert on the planet. She looked out at the sea of faces, CEOs, veteran pilots, FAA officials, engineers, men and women who represented the entire spectrum of the industry she had single-handedly brought to a standstill. "Good morning," she began, her voice resonating with a newfound confidence. 6 months ago, I was told to wait outside. I was dismissed because my warning didn't fit the preconceived notions of the person in charge. My expertise was invisible to him because he saw my face before he heard my words. She paused, letting the weight of that statement settle over the room. The failure of Aura Wing Airlines was not at its core a technical failure. The faulty code was just a symptom. The disease was a culture of arrogance, a culture that believes experience is a substitute for vigilance, a culture that equates authority with infallibility, a culture that is resistant to voices that don't look or sound like the ones it's used to hearing. She clicked a button, and a slide appeared on the giant screen behind her. It was a simple, elegant flowchart. At the top it read, "The Reed Protocol. Today the FAA is announcing a new mandatory directive for all U.S. airlines," she explained. "It's called the Threat Verification and Escalation Protocol. We're calling it the Reed Protocol. It establishes a clear, non-retaliatory channel for any crew member, ground staff, or credentialed expert to flag a potential safety concern and force an immediate mandatory technical review, bypassing the normal chain of command if necessary. It creates a system where the validity of the concern is the only thing that matters, not the rank or the title or the appearance of the person raising it." It was revolutionary. She hadn't just fixed a bug, she had redesigned the human system that allowed the bug to become a threat. She had used the power she had gained, not for revenge, but for change. "We put our faith in complex systems every day," she concluded, her eyes sweeping across the audience. "But our greatest vulnerability will always be human. It's the arrogance that prevents us from listening, the prejudice that makes us dismiss, and the pride that makes us afraid to say, 'I might be wrong.' Let's check. The skies will only be as safe as our willingness to listen to every voice, no matter where it comes from. Let's build a culture where no one with a valid concern is ever told to wait outside again." The room was silent for a beat, and then it erupted. The applause was thunderous, a wave of respect and recognition. It wasn't just for her technical skill, it was for her courage, her integrity. After her speech, as she was being surrounded by well-wishers, she saw David Chen waiting for her by the side of the stage. He had a proud, fatherly smile on his face. "You didn't just shut them down, Evelyn," he said, handing her a bottle of water. "You rebuilt them better." Evelyn smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "We'll see. It's just a first step." As she looked out over the crowd, her gaze drifted towards the window, where a plane was gracefully climbing into the clear blue sky. It was a beautiful sight, a miracle of engineering and human cooperation, and she knew with a certainty that ran bone deep that it was safer now because her voice had been heard. The lesson had been learned, paid for, in the currency of a ruined airline and a disgraced captain. It was a steep price, but for the millions of people who would fly tomorrow and the day after, it was a price worth paying. So what's the takeaway from the story of Dr. Evelyn Reed and Aura Wing Airlines? It's a powerful reminder that true authority doesn't come from a uniform or a title. It comes from knowledge and integrity. It's a lesson in what happens when systemic prejudice collides with undeniable expertise. Captain Jensen and Aura Wing Airlines didn't just have a bad day. Their entire culture was a ticking time bomb of arrogance, and Dr. Reed was simply the one who saw the timer hit 0. This story shows how karma isn't some mystical force. It's the logical and often brutal consequence of our own actions catching up to us. The pilot's 4 simple words, "Wait outside," cost him his career, his identity, and brought a billion-dollar corporation to its knees. If this story resonated with you, and you believe in the power of speaking truth to power, please take a second to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. What did you think of Captain Jensen's fate? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.